Hello and a very warm welcome to Amhara Media Corporation. This is our daily news live from the studio and I am Gaila Damu. Stay with us. The government of Ethiopia has called on the international community, friends of Ethiopia and citizens to play their parts in the rehabilitation of victims of the terrorist TPLF in Amhara and Afar regions. Brahan Warkana reports.
Briefing journalists yesterday, Government Communication Service Minister Leggese Tulu said the invading terrorist group has caused immense damages on a number of public and private properties in the two regions. Many people have been displaced due to the heinous acts of the group, adding that the government of Ethiopia is working to rehabilitate the displaced and reconstruct infrastructures and public facilities destroyed by TPLF. According to him, some public services providing institutions have already commenced operation in liberated areas after the necessary maintenance were made. The minister called on neutral international institutions to investigate the damage done to people and properties in collaboration with the government. Leggese further stated that Ethiopians have achieved remarkable victories over internal and external enemies. He added that most part of Amhara region and all parts of Afar have been liberated from the invading force of the terrorist TPLF in the last 2 weeks, and the terrorists are in a disarray as they faced humiliated defeat. The victories are gained through the coordinated and technology-backed operations of Ethiopian security forces over the terrorist groups. However, the terrorist TPLF group had damaged and destroyed public and private properties in the invaded regions. The minister urged Ethiopians, friends of Ethiopia and international organizations to contribute their share to rehabilitation efforts to help the displaced persons to return home and restore destroyed properties. Meanwhile, the coalition of Ethiopian security forces have also taken measures against the terrorist Sheni group in Oromia region. Most of the members and leaders of the group have been destroyed. Sheni has been committing ethnic-based attacks on Amhara community mainly in western part of Oromia region, Leggese stated, adding that the group has also killed prominent persons and elders including Abagada leaders in different parts of the region. The minister said operations will continue to eliminate the group. He called on the public to continue supporting Ethiopian security forces in various ways to maintain the unity and sovereignty of Ethiopia and eliminate the anti-peace forces once and for all.
Scholars say that Ethiopia is now battling against global information war, which requires coordinated public relation responses to reverse the threat. Brahan Warkana tells us more.
Approached by the Ethiopian news agency, the experts noted that giant media outlets sponsored by cross-border corporate companies and some Western powers are involved in the ongoing disinformation campaign. Getachew Negatu, a political communication expert, said some of the Western media had waged war against Libya, Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan prior to launching military interventions.
ብዙ ጊዜ ለሲኤንኤን ወይ ቢቢሲ እንደዚህ ብራንዳቸው ትልቅ የሆኑ ሚዲያዎችን አግስፈን የምናያቸው እንደዚህ አይነት አንኤቲካል ስራዎች ይሰራሉ ብለን አይደለም።
We often see giant Western media outlets like CNN, BBC or other big brands doing unethical reporting. The international media were waging war against the countries before invading the countries. Fox News or CNN were, for example, behind the Iraq war conspiracy. The oil companies were behind it. Similarly, the media have been intensifying psychological warfare to see a disintegrated Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa, even if the evil deeds are being reversed by Ethiopians at home and abroad, the expert added, noting that the fake news and the disinformation campaigns are intentional. Getachew cited the glaring distortion of BBC. The corporation reported Ethiopia closes schools to boost civil war effort. This is a lie as secondary school students have been called to support crop harvesting. He explained that the reason why some Western media outlets present distorted information and ignore the principles of journalism on Ethiopia purely stems from a political economic interest where the country has crucial geostrategic importance in the region. Moreover, some of the Western powers seek to establish a puppet government in Ethiopia, and various agencies are funding the media in their efforts of the information warfare.
ይሄ ኮንቲኒየስ የሆነ ክራይሲስ የሚቀጥል ከሆነ የሚጠቀሙ አካላት ይኖራሉ።
If this crisis continues, there will be beneficiaries like in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria and Yemen. Therefore, they are eyeing on Ethiopia's crisis as a new market opportunity, even though the country and its diaspora are aggressively thwarting the danger.
ሶሪያም ሁሉም ጋር አገር ተበትኗል። እዚህ ደግሞ አዲስ ማርኬት ፕሌስ ነው የሚሆነው።
Since the ongoing information warfare is threatening Ethiopia, Getachew called on the local media, political and social media activists to come together and reverse the danger.
ዋር ነው የሚዲያ ጦርነት ነው። ጦርነት የገጠምነው ደግሞ ከሆነ ግሩፕ ጋር አይደለም።
We are not only at war with a group or digital wayani, a social media army working for terrorist TPLF, but also the entire world, which has launched disinformation campaign and psychological warfare against us.
ለመጠየቅ ይገባዋል።
On his part, Addis Ababa University School of Journalism lecturer Abdi Sazari said the recent Western media pressure on Ethiopia emanates from the foreign policy of the countries that they are cited. He stated that the US and its allies have been currently using the media as a wing or an army to implement their foreign policy interests in Ethiopia. The scholar noted some of these Western media outlets always choose their perspective of narrative in terms of their country's benefits and foreign policy strategies. A media cannot be outside the political economy establishment of the state. The media in the United States reflects the American political and economic structure. Thus, the influence of Western media that we have been witnessing in Ethiopia stems from its foreign policy. The lecturer further stated that some Western powers, particularly the United States, are making clear that the pressure against Ethiopia is due to the emerging relationship of China in the African continent. Abdissa said America has not seen such international competition from China in its history. He pointed out that the media pressure on Ethiopia is therefore to reverse Chinese expansion both in Ethiopia and Africa. The expert finally called for organized media engagement and public relation activities to reverse the threat at all levels.
The American political analyst Andrew Caribco said that African countries must collectively pool their diplomatic efforts to achieve equitable United Nations Security Council reform that enable the continent to be represented in the global body. And Netanyahu has the details.
Talking to Ethiopian news agency, he said the United Nations Security Council is long overdue for comprehensive reform in order to align this top global body with the radical changes that have been taking place in the 7.5 decades since its founding. As it stands, the United Nations Security Council permanent members represent World War II victories and the only legal nuclear weapon states. The analyst elaborated that conventional colonialism has ended since then. The dozens of countries obtained independence, especially in Africa, and other countries have obtained nuclear weapons too. Furthermore, Caribco stated the world is presently in the midst of an emerging multipolar order that has seen many global south states become much more prominent in international affairs. He noted that the failure to thus far reform the United Nations Security Council to reflect this change is due to its permanent members' disagreements about this issue. Regrettably, this has led to the growing perception that this global body is out of touch with the global public, according to the analyst, who added that this in turn has driven concerns that some of its decisions, especially those related to Africa, might be considered unfair. He said a balance certainly needs to be struck in order to expand the United Nations Security Council without hamstringing its efficiency, which is admittedly already pretty changed, as it's due to the US-led Western bloc's resistance to Chinese and Russian initiatives, including their proposed reforms. Caribco said that Therefore, all African countries must collectively pour their diplomatic efforts in order to achieve equitable United Nations Security Council reform, enabling their continent to finally be represented in this global body. However, there must be a fair process in place for select which African country or countries will have a seat as United Nations Security Council. According to him, one possibility could be for the African Union to decide the issue among itself, such as agreeing to have a certain number of countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria and South Africa rotate every few years, with a mechanism in place of expanding the circle of states in response to the continent's political and economic evolution across the coming century, so as to ensure maximum equality. The analyst added that all this remains an academic discussion for now until there is tangible reform in the United Nations Security Council in order to allow Africa to be represented there in the first place, but China and Russia can be counted on to help. Another possibility building upon the prior one that was proposed is for the African Union to rotate countries after a certain period of time in order for each of its regional integration blocks to be represented. To elaborate, ECOWAS, IGAD and SADC, among others, could then decide among themselves which of their members would take Africa's United Nations Security Council seat during each bloc's rotational term. Of course, it might also be decided by the African Union that whichever country or countries are selected would receive permanent representation without any rotations, just like is the case with the global body as their permanent members. Koribko believes that the rotational proposal should still be seriously considered because it could be a pragmatic compromise among those countries in the continent that might compete for such a permanent seat or seats. He elaborated that this must be decided by Africans themselves and no solution should be imposed from abroad. Whether Africa wants traditional permanent representation or a rotating from thereof, its decision must be respected by all. The analyst underscored that it is simply the fairest and most equitable policy available, since deciding African issues without African representations isn't right. All states are legally considered to be equal to one another under international law, though with the caveat being the United Nations Security Council's decisions are legally binding. Koribko noted that this means there is a de facto hierarchy of states which reflects international reality of the times, while this might have been considered fair and equitable in the past. He noted that the United Nations Security Council's present composition is indisputably outdated, considering the paradigm changes in international relations connected with the emerging multipolar world order. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced that he has joined other African leaders in reiterating that a continent of around 1.3 billion people needs a permanent voice and seat at the United Nations Security Council represented through a bloc. Currently, 3 African countries are holding temporal seats at the council.
National Disaster Risk Management Commission has urged the international community to support the recovery and rehabilitation efforts in the northern part of Ethiopia. Abebe Brhani reports.
Commissioners for National Disaster Risk Management Commission, Mitiku Kasa, and United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator Catherine Sozi gave press briefing before yesterday to update on the humanitarian operations in northern Ethiopia. During the occasion, Commissioner Mitiku said the international community failed to condemn TPLF for its destructive acts by rejecting the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire declared by the government, noting that TPLF has manipulated the declaration and invaded Amhara and Afar regions. He added that this invasion resulted in displacement of 1.8 million people and leaving 8.3 million people to challenges of food insecurity. Furthermore, the terrorist group committed mass killings, looted and destroyed private and public infrastructures, as well as committed several human rights violations. He said that the international community chose silence while North Wollo, North Gondar and Waghemra people deprived of humanitarian aid for more than 5 months, adding that they failed to denounce the TPLF that has been using starvation as weapon of war. The Commissioner elaborated that the government of Ethiopia urges international community to support the response to recovery and rehabilitation efforts in northern part of the country, and give due attention to 8.3 million people who are affected by the TPLF in Amhara and Afar regions. He reaffirmed that the government of Ethiopia is committed to working closely with humanitarian development partners to save the livelihood and ensure implementation of recovery and rehabilitation activities in the affected areas. The Commissioner said, despite the efforts of the government to create a smooth flow of humanitarian assistance to Tigray region, some partners have been deliberately undermining and ignoring these unreserved efforts. He added that they have also been denying the real measures being undertaken by the government to boost the humanitarian assistance to the region. Furthermore, he revealed that some members of the international community failed to denounce the violation of international humanitarian laws and human rights abuses being deliberately committed by the terrorist TPLF. As to him, since 12 July, 1,317 trucks have entered in Mekelle transporting food and non-food items, out of which 77% of the 8 trucks have not been returned, and the terrorist group has been using these trucks to transport soldiers to invade Amhara and Afar regions. Moreover, he indicated that since November 23rd, some 203 trucks carrying around 8,800 metric tons of food and non-food items have arrived in Mekelle. All of these trucks have not returned from the region. Metiku stressed the need to correct the narration on the efforts of the government of Ethiopia, and efforts must be exerted to understand the reality on the ground. He asked why did the international donors and operators are reluctant to condemn the deliberate violation being orchestrated by the group. United Nations resident and humanitarian coordinator Catherine Sozi said on her part that the conflict continues to drive large-scale displacement, loss of livelihoods, and limited access to markets, food and basic services. She reaffirmed that the United Nations, together with the humanitarian partners, remains committed to addressing the growing needs and find urgent and sustainable solutions.
A law lecturer at Bahar University pointed out that there is a clear violation of the international law of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states. Brian Workna tells us more.
A lecturer of law at Bahar University, Zawdu Mangasha, stayed with Amhara Media Corporation Messenger program, said that the main principle of international law is the concept of state sovereignty, which says states cannot interfere in the internal affairs of other states, and it is incorporated in the United Nations Charter.
Regarding the international law, of course, the major or the main principle of international law is the concept of state sovereignty. This goes back to 1648, that is a treaty of Westphalia, where the European countries just agreed to have a principle where states cannot not interfere in the internal affair of other states, and it became the cornerstone of international law, which is also incorporated within the United Nations Charter.
Zawdu further stated that though the international law cannot allow states to interfere in the internal affairs of other states, United States of America and Western states are intervening in the internal affairs of Ethiopia in many ways.
States like US and Western states tries to just intervene on issues that are the internal affair of Ethiopia. For example, starting from the GERD negotiation, it is possible to look the intervention of US. Just Ethiopia was just requested to sign the proposal that is submitted by the US regarding GERD, without just asking whether Ethiopia is willing to sign or not that document.
As to the lecturer, the main concern of United Nations Security Council is to maintain international peace and security across the globe. However, the United Nations Security Council is addressing the issue of development, which is not directly related with peace and security like GERD issue.
As a matter of principle, the very objective of having Security Council is for maintaining the international peace and security. So this is a cornerstone or why the Security Council was established. Though this institution, this organ of the United Nations is mandated with a peace and security issue, it is just trying to address issues that is not directly related to the peace and security matter. For example, if you remember in the past, it was discussing on issues of guard, which is completely a developmental agenda.
Finally, Daudu stated that the government of Ethiopia has to give credit to the role played by the countries like Kenya, China and Russia in adhering the principle of United Nations Security Council on the internal affairs of Ethiopia.
I think it is important to mention the role played by the African states and Kenya especially and other countries like China and Russia, just to adhere to the principles that are stated within the United Nations Charter. That is, issues that are completely under the mandates of states should not be brought to the attention of the international, the Peace and Security Council.
That's all the news we have for today. I am Gaila Damu. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned with the rest of our programs.